Hello, Formula One fans, and we are excited to bring you an interview today with David Coulthard. David Coulthard raced Formula One from 1994 through 2008, and had he not been in a mix with guys like Michael Schumacher, Ayrton Senna, and Alain Prost, David Coulthard could well have been a Formula One world champion. In fact, one year he won more races than anybody else, and what it would take today to win a Formula One world championship. But it just was not to be. He had an incredible career, and we're just really happy to bring you this interview. This interview, by the way, is being sponsored by Thynology. Folks, these cars generate a lot of data, and you need somewhere to store data, and the data that is stored in data centers. And Thynology is a data center in Austin, Texas. So if you need data storage, if you need a private cloud, a public cloud, you need co-location for your servers, then Thynology is the place to go. Go to thynology.com. That is thynology.com.
Yeah, good, thank you. I was having so much fun in my office. I'm just sitting opposite Viola, who works with me, that we knew we were meant to be on, but we completely lost track of time. So sorry to keep you waiting.
No problem. Been there and done that many times myself. So how's the weather in Monaco this morning? Monaco, sorry, not Monaco.
Yeah, I think it's not too bad. I haven't spent a lot of time outside, to be honest. So, but yeah, it's normally pretty mild here, which is good. So if you're light sensitive like me, then it's always good to be here. But I spent a bit of time in Scotland over Christmas and New Year, which is obviously a shorter day and a bit grey and wet. But yeah, you dress for the environment, and I also enjoy to be up there.
Right. So yeah, this time of year it's getting dark by what, 3-4 o'clock, and then doesn't get light till 9 or 10.
Yeah,
correct. I grew up just east of you. Do you know where Berwick and Alnwick is?
No.
Berwick and Alnwick.
Oh yeah. Sorry, Berwick. Yeah.
Berwick, yeah. So I grew up just south of Berwick. So yeah, in the Cheviot Hills. So yeah. So the winter times was pretty dreary.
Yeah.
So talking of that, David, tell us how the journey from that small town in Scotland to a Formula One driver.
Well, very straightforward, actually, in hindsight. My father had raced karts when he was a teenager. He'd won the Scottish Karting Championship and was enjoying competing when his father passed away when he was 14. And that meant his racing stopped, and he got sent off to boarding school, where he had a pretty miserable time as a dyslexic, like Sir Jackie.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So, but he'd lived, as a teenager, enough of the sort of young man experience to know that he loved motorsport. So, fast forward to he's married, he's had children. And he's sponsoring some other local Scottish racers in long circuit karting. So I was going to kart races in the UK from an early age, watching. And then I guess it was inevitable that my brother, myself, my younger sister, we were all given an opportunity to have a kart and to have a go at racing. And it kind of progressed from there. I certainly wasn't. It wasn't obvious that I was going to make my way to Formula One. I think my first race, I was lapped by the entire field. But within a couple of years, I'd won the Scottish Championship, and then moved on to winning the British, and then moved into cars at 17. So it all seemed fairly straightforward, actually. Of course, it took a lot of weekends, a lot of work, and a hell of a lot of commitment from my parents. But I just happened to be right place at right time for many opportunities, like Paul Stewart Racing being formed, Jackie Stewart's son's team. That carried me towards being excuse me, and how do I stop an incoming call? I'm doing this. I'm doing this on my mobile phone. So that led me to being the test driver at Williams, and then obviously we know sadly Ayrton was killed in May '94, and that became the way I started my career in Formula One. So on reflection, it all seems very straightforward. It took a long time, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of uncertainty. But in the end, we can reflect on the journey.
Yeah, well, as you know, now that you're getting up there in age, I think what you're 50, 51 now. So you'll see the years start clicking by like, months used to. So when you're young, everything seems to take a lot longer, but in actual fact, the journey of life is quite short.
Yeah.
So when you're making that transition from kart to cars, right? I mean, obviously, there's a large difference in the size, the volume, the power. And I'm assuming now you're moving into full, 5 or 6 speed or 4 speed transmissions. So what's that like? What's that transition from karting to cars? Like it's one thing to drive a family car and stick shift driving down the road, but it's quite another thing to be driving a racing car.
Sure.
How was that? What was that transition like?
It was horrible. I didn't like it at all the first time I tested a Formula Ford. And I remember saying to my father, can I just stay racing cars? But he was quite clear that there was no long-term future in karting. So you stick with it, and then that becomes your new reality. But even the first races I did, you'd qualify in the morning for 10 minutes, and then you'd wait all day for a 8-lap race of Silverstone or Brands Hatch or something, and then you go home. Karting, you were practicing in heats and 3 heats and then a final. It was just non-stop action, so it was quite difficult to initially get used to so little activity. But I was lucky enough to have the Leslie family support me a great deal. Father David Leslie and his son also David Leslie. They took me to all the racetracks, testing and discovering and learning about vehicle dynamics and learning how to get the best out of a car. And that meant that I won both the championships in my first year. So that was a great boost and a great opportunity to progress.
So when you look at the Formula One drivers today and the skill sets that they have, and you look at guys like Clark and you mentioned Jackie Stewart and Graham Hill and John Surtees and all those guys, how do you think the skill sets of those drivers are compared with the drivers, the Formula One drivers, of your time and today? They're quite different as well, because they never had the Formula One drivers today go from karts to paddle shifters straight away. There's no interim journey that you went through, from going from regular gear shifters and things like that to paddle shifters.
Yeah, I think that in the end you don't know what you don't know. So the fact that they never drove a manual H pattern box or a sequential box, that's just, they don't know. They never drove that. They just went straight into what technology they had today. So I guess a little bit like when Jackie Stewart and Jim Clark, and certainly in Jim's case, I don't think there was any aerodynamics really on the cars, but Jackie would have been through that era in the early 70s where wings were appearing and they were experiencing downforce. So I think the reality is great drivers are great drivers, and they will always adapt to what's there. There's an argument which will never be disproven, because if you look at rally drivers, you could argue are the most versatile of all drivers, because they deal with snow, they deal with sand, they deal with tarmac, they deal with ice. And certainly people like Sebastian Loeb, whenever I've done events with him, like a Race of Champions, he's an exceptional driver in those type of events. He's done some circuit racing with not the same level of success. So it's just different, isn't it? If you've spent your whole life being on a 18-corner racetrack where you're just repeating to perfection, that's a different skill than blasting along a mountain road at 99.9%, but being able to do that consistently, where maybe the others are 98% or whatever it happens to be. So the reality is you'll never be able to compare, but I think that every generation should be better than the previous one. I think if you put Fangio and Clark and Schumacher and Senna and all these guys at the peak of their performance today at the same age, I think it would be an exceptional battle, because they would be living for this time. But they didn't live at this time. They lived at different times, and you can only look at any generation and go, they were the best of their era. But technology makes things better. Athletes become a lot more honed in their performance, and that's why we see at Olympics, slowly but surely records are broken over time.
Right. Yes. In fact, I have twins that swim at the collegiate level, and so the dedication and everything that goes into that, and and they're battling every day for a quarter of a second.
Yeah.
So I understand it. If you actually look at the college swimmers of today, they would all have been winning gold medals back in the 90s, right? So things do change. But what's interesting to me is watching the drivers of today. You look at a guy like Jim Clark. He was my hero, so I knew a lot about him. And he'd go from a rally car to a sports car to a Formula 2 to a Formula 1. I mean, he'd drive all these cars and he'd win, right? He was very good at winning races. And when you look at the drivers of today, you can take somebody like Dario Franchitti, who went from Formula 1. He went to Indy 5, into the Indy cars, and then to NASCARs. And he never really had the success in IndyCar and the NASCAR, especially. And like 18, 20-year-old kids are beating this really world class driver. So what is it? Is it the cars that are just quite different from the way they were 40, 50 years ago, or is it the driver skill set has been honed so much to one particular type of car?
I think that if you look at the sort of era of Jim Clark, where I think did he win the Indy 500 as well as winning?
He did one. He's the only man to win the Indy 500 and the World Championship in the same year.
Yeah. So the cars that they were driving in Formula 1 at that time had no downforce. They were mechanically,
right.
The grip came through the mechanical grip of the car, and the Indy cars were the same. So, a great driver could feel the car in those configurations. I think that once aerodynamics have come into play, then every era of car and every formula becomes very specific. I tried touring cars after Formula 1, and going to a lesser performing car was quite, I found, challenging, because it just doesn't have the same performance. It doesn't brake as well, it doesn't turn as well, it doesn't do anything. You've spent 15 years of your life seeing what the potential is, and that potential improving year on year, and then suddenly you take a step back to probably like 20 years previously, and everything is just, well, that's not very good. So I think in many ways it's easier for younger guys to go up when the performance is getting better than it is to come back down again, and certainly history would suggest that as well. But yeah, I think IndyCar is something a number of Formula 1 drivers have gone out there. I think Nigel Mansell won the championship. Yeah. There was probably a good crossover of the performance of the Formula 1 cars and the Indy cars of that time. Not having done it, I can't possibly know what the difference is, but I think like anything, the best tennis players in the world are not the best squash players, and they're not the best table tennis players. Yeah. They're all essentially doing the same thing. But when you do one thing repeatedly and you've got an incredible athletic skill and reaction, that's why you become so good at it. A pilot landing a 777, into Heathrow is no less pilot potential skill than a fighter pilot, but not everyone can be a fighter pilot.
That's a good point. So when you go back to your days of driving and the cars, the engines today, which do you think one is preferential for both the driver and the spectator, the naturally aspirated engine or the hybrids that they have today?
Well, I really enjoyed the normally aspirated engines. I drove V10s, V8s. My first test in McLaren was a V12, and they have a mechanical connection to the driver, which is very different to a hybrid. Of course, a hybrid is incredible levels of torque. It accelerates the car very quickly off the corner before the main engine takes over. So they are extremely efficient and high performing. um, engine generating a lot of horsepower. So noise-wise, I would say I preferred the normally aspirated, but it seems that Formula One's increasing its fan base right now. So the reality is the show is the actual race rather than the noise. So if the show is good and there's competitive racing, then I think that the sport will continue to move on. You know, I think they had electric vehicles back in the 1800s. So, you know, we've
Yeah,
had
they've been around a long time. Yes.
yeah, exactly. And in
So
the end, the racing's racing.
yeah, and talking about that, so during the race, one of the things, of course, when I was going to the races back in the '60s, it's very different than what it is today, and thankfully a lot safer. A little research in 1968, there were 146 racing drivers that died in wrecks, mostly due to mechanical failures and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But to look at a racing driver's life, you know, you do spend a lot of time, especially today. The drivers spend a lot of time doing interviews and things like that. So, what about the downtime? You know, during the day when you're not out there in the car practicing, what does a driver spend his time doing other than TV interviews today, right?
Yeah, well, they have to train. You know, when I was competing, I would train twice a day. So I do my first cardio session starting at 9. So I just operated my day like let's say a normal working day. And the time, depending on what session I was doing, that could take me up to lunchtime, and then you've got a few hours in the afternoon to take care of your admin and whatever else planning you've got, because clearly you don't just miraculously arrive at these events. And the teams in Formula One are not normally involved. Certainly for me, they were never logistically involved in my travel because I'm living in Monaco and I have done for many years. So I would know what was the best options and travel solutions for me. So that needs to be coordinated. And then in the evening, 5 o'clock, I would be back in the gym for a strength session, which by the time that had concluded, it was dinner time. And then rest and recovery, bed. So there's a large element. My winter was very much a sort of groundhog day of time spent training and recovery. Because that once you get into the season, you've got a lot more travel, a lot more disjointed, and then you don't have the luxury of really building a core base of strength and fitness.
So you spent 15 years driving Formula One cars, and then you woke up one day and you're not driving Formula One cars. What is that transition like, and how long and how much effort was it to get through that? All of a sudden, your entire life has just changed.
I didn't find it at all difficult because I was ready to stop racing Formula One, and I never knew I was ready to stop until I knew I was ready to stop. So I think it's like any relationship, you know, if you're in love and you're in love and you're in love, and then all of a sudden one day you wake up and you think, who's this person beside me? You know, something changes. And, you know, I guess for some people it's a slow burn thing, for others it's an overnight thing. So I've never been someone to live in the past. I know I'm surrounded by images of my past and my office here, and my whole sort of business life is linked through everything I do is still linked into Formula One, which I'm a fan of the sport. I'm very happy that that's the case. So some people have a complete change of direction in their life. I've still remained involved, but I have none of the mental anguish of competing. You know, some of that is the highest of highs and some of it's the lowest of lows. But in the end, I think, like all sport, there's a period of time that you can do it. And then when the relationship with that sport is done, in terms of you competing as an athlete, if you're lucky, you get to make that decision. If you're not lucky, as some people, you know, are no longer required in that particular formula, then they maybe go off and do other racing and keep going until they're, you know, grayer and older than I am. And still some of them perform at a very high level. But the reality, of course, is that not in the highest formulas, and you know, Formula One or IndyCar or whatever would be considered the highest formulas. That's where the manufacturers are.
So it looks like Formula One's going to add two more teams. in 2026. They're adding, I think, is it 23 or 24 races this year. One, it's a huge logistical problem moving these teams around the world. But what do you think, realistically, how many races do you think Formula One can add to their schedule? Because now with adding in the two additional teams, they're going to have additional prize money, additional money to be spending. So they've got to get that money from somewhere, and that's, obviously they get money by adding races. So from a driver's perspective and a team's perspective, what do you think is, what's the reality of the number of races that they can accommodate in 1 year?
Well, the reality is they could race almost every weekend if they were motivated to do so. The practicality of that, of course, with logistics is very challenging. And throw in the fact that we are a true world championship, getting from Australia to Canada to Brazil or wherever it happens to be is not the work of moments, but it is the work of a flight. So I think the answer is in two. I think the drivers could do more races, but I think the teams will reach a point where they just can't physically retain the quality of staff, or in a cost cap where you're having to reduce the amount of people you have working for you. You're not going to find many mechanics that are prepared to basically spend their entire year on the road. You'll find it for a period of time, but you'll not find it for a long time. So it will find its natural point. We're not going to end up, I doubt, with 30 races.
Right.
But if you did back-to-back weekends like we did in COVID, then there's no reason why they couldn't add more races where logistically retaining people in the same space. But you could argue, would you get the same amount of ticket sales for the second race at Silverstone or the second race wherever it is you got at the first? Well, if tickets are sold out, maybe you would. I don't know. Maybe in some places you would be able to do double weekends. And doing that in the UK would certainly be, for the majority of teams, practical, because then mechanics could go home as normal in between time. Not so good if you're Sauber or Ferrari or Alpha Tauri, of course, but
or they could arrange the races to go around the world instead of going, like they went from Brazil to Dubai, right? So why not do Dubai while you're out in Saudi Arabia? So they could rearrange the schedules a little bit, I guess.
Yeah.
So one last, maybe a couple of last difficult questions, right? The first question is, Juan Fangio said that in his estimation, the team was responsible for the about 65% of the time for the car winning, and the driver was about 35%. And he said over time that would change. So what do you think that was during your time of driving, and what do you think it is for the guys today?
Well, there's 2 points to that answer, I think. The first point being, no one's consistently won races in an average car. If you look through the history of time, in the majority of my career, if you look at Williams, they had a winning car when I joined them. So Damon, myself, were competing with Michael Schumacher, who had another winning car, and there wasn't really many other teams had a winning car. So if you go through periods of time, there's usually been two teams that are competing against each other. Occasionally, like 1988, you get domination from McLaren, where they won 15 out of 16 races, and they didn't win the full sweep because of a reliability on Prost and then a coming together with Senna and Jean-Louis Schlesser. So that was, an unusual set of circumstances. So you have to always have a good car to have the opportunity to win. You will get the odd, Olivier Panis winning Monte Carlo in '96, or you had his name, it's just gone out of my mind. Sorry, in the Alpine, he won Budapest a couple of years ago. Lovely tall French chap. I forget his name right now. But
it gets worse as you get older, by the way. The memory gets worse as you get older.
Yeah, yeah. So Ocon, excuse me, Esteban Ocon won.
Okay, yes, yeah.
So you'll always get the one sort of random race victory, but the consistent victories come, as we've seen, like the last year, it's been shared between Ferrari and Red Bull.
Yeah.
So having said that, you end up maybe with 20% of the grid have got the chance to win races, and then that gives you four drivers within those two teams that have a chance of winning a Grand Prix. And then you look at, well, Max won 15 races or 14 races, and won 2 or 3. So the driver clearly is the final percentages that make the difference within the team. But the team have to still be the dominant percentage. Otherwise, Alonso would be winning Grand Prix, or Hamilton would have won a Grand Prix if that was the thing. So I'm not sure. And Fangio was a 5-time world champion, so I'm just going to follow his figures and say, if that's what he thinks it was back in the day, well, he was a pretty good judge. But I think that it's broken into those two elements. Like I say, first you've got to have the right car, and then you find out who the best driver is in the team.
Yeah, and there was an example a couple of years ago when Lewis had COVID, and George Russell stepped into his car, and he pretty much got the same. He didn't win the race because of strategy errors with tires, but he pretty much got the same performance out of that car as Lewis did in that race. So yeah.
I think the point there is talent can always jump in and deliver a lap time. Greatness delivers it over the course of an entire year. So there's been examples. Gilles Villeneuve, incredible talent, but never managed to really bring it together over the year for whatever reason. Or Jean Alesi, great talent, won one Grand Prix. So anyone who gets to Formula One has got speed, but the greats are the ones that consistently deliver year on year, and that's where you really find out. And I think George is a great talent, and I think it's fantastic he got his first victory. But if Mercedes deliver a winning car this year, it will be a real judge and a real gauge, because Lewis has been there and done it. And last year he obviously wasn't in as happy a place as he had been for various reasons. So an on-form Lewis is a formidable competitor, and I do truly believe that George has the talent to step up. But there's one thing talking about it, it's another thing actually doing it.
I think in all sports, there's that one little piece of mind, that they can all physically be the same, talenting or being the same, but the true champions, the very top, the Lewis, the Fangios, the Clarks, Stewarts, Schumachers. There's like in swimming, you've got the same things. In tennis, you got the very, very top guys. At the time a split-second decision has to be made to make sure that they're the champion. They're able to do it.
Yeah, I agree.
So then the next question is a difficult question. I on my podcast, I put out my answer to this question. So, and it's hard because every generation's they have their own really talented guys. But from an overall perspective, who would you say is the greatest Formula One driver of all time?
Well, it's not an exact answer, of course, is it? Because it's just an opinion. But if you're asking me my opinion, then I guess I would look back, prior to me being in Formula One, as there was that great era with Senna and Prost and Mansell and Piquet. There's many drivers that have been exceptional. You mentioned Fangio, you mentioned Jim Clark, you mentioned Jackie Stewart, Graham Hill was a multi-world. There's been very few average champions, but what I would say is the true greats are multiple champions. So that I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone who's won one title, because that's one more title than I achieved. But there's been people who've won a title with winning less races in a season than I managed to win in a season. So I think it very much depends on in any given season. But I admire great performers in sport, and the great performers tend not to be one-hit wonders. They tend to be people who do it over and over. So, let's say that you bring it down to a group of, they've got to have won at least 2 championships, preferably 3. to then bring that number down further. But then you can naturally then pick for yourself. But if I was in Brazil right now, I would say Senna, because everyone would like to hear Senna. You know, if I was in Germany right now, I'd say Schumacher. You know, it doesn't.
It's a really difficult question, but for all sports, it's a difficult question.
Amazing. Yeah, they were all amazing. So I admire what they achieved, because I know how hard I had to work to achieve less. So I can only imagine, you know, how skilled they were and how hard they worked to achieve more.
Yes. Okay. So last question. You have a young son or daughter over here in the United States. We're trying to build Formula One here in the United States. What would you advise them to do? How would you advise them to get from where they are today to be a Formula One driver in 10 and 12 years from now, when they're 21, 22?
Well, clearly they need to have the talent to be out on track, and they need to have the commitment to develop that talent. And they have to believe that they're working harder than someone else, because there's, as I say to my son, there are, pick a number, no end of young talented, you know, my son's 14. So there's no end of 14-year-olds out there that are talented in a kart. In the end, the high achievers have got work ethic and application. And if you think you could be working harder, then you should be. You know, I know you can overtrain, but I'd be surprised if many of the teenagers are overtraining. You know, that is their time. That is the best moment for them to be investing in themselves, investing in their physical preparation, investing in their mind, investing in their sleep patterns, you know, regular sleep and focus. And if you're not giving 100% and you're not thinking about it and becoming a student of your chosen sport, then imagine is somebody else giving more. And if they are, what do we expect? If somebody works harder, we expect them to get greater results. So if you expect to work and achieve more, then you would have to be incredibly talented. So just work, and communicate with the teams and mechanics and engineers and people, and share your enthusiasm. Because if you seem a bit, you know, not motivated, then how are you ever going to motivate people around about you?
Right. So my kid's swim coach said, to be the best, you've got to be the first to the pool and the last one out of the water. And that, because you brought up work ethic and commitment and stuff like that. And I think that's true of all the champions. And not just champions, but you know, we always focus on the champions, but you know, there are 20 guys that get out there and race every weekend right now, and every one of them are putting in the time and effort and the commitment and everything to do what it is. But because we're all human and we're all different, then we all have different talents and different capabilities and different decision-making processes. So, Anyway, David Coulthard, thank you for joining the Formula One News Hour. It has been a pleasure, and I'm going to hit up a good friend of yours, who's also on gets out there on the Formula One track every Sunday and walks up and down and interviews all the people. You know who I'm talking about. So hopefully I can get him to do an interview just like we've done with you. And thank you very, very much. And I hope we'll see you here in Austin next year.
Yeah, I think I'm scheduled to be out in Austin. Got Vegas online as well as Miami, so America's getting good representation, and I think everyone's very excited about what Vegas might bring, not to the on-track action, because I don't think it really matters what track you're on, unless it's Monaco, which is obviously more challenging for overtaking, but just the show, the atmosphere. I think America does sports and entertainment brilliantly, and I think that's where Liberty have been so strong in their ownership of Formula One. And then of course Netflix and the pandemic and people being, you know, forced to search content probably helped as well. But anyway, it's Formula One's in a growth spurt right now, and that's fantastic to see.
It is. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. All the best.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that interview with David Coulthard as much as we did interviewing him. It was a really good chemistry. We got along really well, and I'm just amazed at how in-depth and how honest he was about all of the different things that we touched in this interview. The interview, by the way, is brought to you by Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty is an organization that is out there to promote parents' involvement in both school boards and their child's education. Today, the school systems and the school boards are not teaching what they should be teaching: math, English, science, all of those things that can help give our kids a great start in life. No, they're teaching them about transgender and gay, and teaching them that all white people are born racists. These are not good things to be teaching children, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. What we need them teaching our children is the things that will make a good life for them. What makes a good life for them is a good education. Moms for Liberty is out there pounding the streets. They've got now over 190 chapters throughout the country. Get involved. Go to momsforliberty.org. That's momsforliberty.org, and sign up to a chapter. Start your own chapter. Make a donation. But please go to momsforliberty.org, and let's get our schools and our school boards back on track. And that's all for this week's, folks, but it wouldn't be fair to finish the week and this week's podcast without thanking our technical guru and producer, Andre Kuhn. Another great effort from Andre this week, especially in helping with the David Coulthard interview and pulling it all together. And so until next week, this is Jonathan Steele saying, have a great week.